back. Today we're going to take a look at how we can utilize an inversion of control container within our WCF services. For the demo today we will be utilizing the structure map IoC container, but the concepts here and the core plumbing that we'll introduce should work from container to container with very little configuration changes. The code in this episode was originally created and posted by Jimmy Bogard over at Los Stickies, and I've turned this into a screencast with his permission to kind of show the flow and show you some of the snafus you may encounter while implementing this. The first thing we want to take a look at is I have a standing WCF service where I am not able to inject my dependencies into my service because I don't have a way to do that. I don't have the hooks in, say, new patient eligibility service because WCF handles that. So what we've had to do is wire it up manually. And I don't really like this. This is a lot. If I do this, I now have direct knowledge of my IoC container sprinkled throughout my code base. Now granted, it should be limited to just my services and my service layer, but that's the one extra layer and one extra place that I have to know about structure map or any IoC container, and I don't like that. I prefer that WCF would inject things in. Well, you can work, but you have to take a little, it takes a little time and energy to get that up and running. What I have here is a very simple service. It's a patient eligibility service, and it says basically is patient eligible for good care. Healthcare is all the concern right now in our country, so I thought decent talking point. And it's using the specification pattern here. We had a great episode by Tim Barks on the specification pattern. If you're not familiar with it, go check it out. Now, the specifications we have in place are very simple. Am I eligible for good care? And basically, there's two choices here, depending on my age and depending on my political affiliation. And if both of those are satisfied, then sure enough, I can have good care. If not, well, I guess I can, get bad care. Let's run this real quick right now so that we can see how it works without the ability to have the WCF engine inject our dependencies. Just going to use the WCF test client here. Don't really care about the various values that be pushed in. Let's click invoke. And if I F10 over this, you can see everything succeeded successfully, and I've got a fully constructed object. Now, if you're familiar with IoC containers, I had to wire this up someplace. It just didn't happen. So let me show you what I've done here to get this simple example working. I just created a global ASX file for my service, and within the application start, I just called into my bootstrap where I'm going to basically just wire up structure map to scan registries. Nothing super complicated here. But as we were talking earlier, I'd really rather not have to do this code right here. What I would rather do is have this. And I would rather let WCF inject my stuff in for me. So what do I need to do to get that to work? Let's come over here. Let's go ahead and include all this code, and I'll walk through this one by one. The first thing I want to take a look at is the instance provider that we are going to create that will be specific to our structure map. One of the great things is WCF does allow a lot of very good extension points, and one of them is the instance provider, and this is basically will allow us to override how how WCF will create objects for us. So I'll inherit off of the instance provider interface and basically leave everything alone, but you'll notice right here I use Object Factory to get my instance. Ideally, this is going to be one of the only places I have knowledge of my container within my application. And you can see it's one line code, so if you're using inject or mock or something like that, not mock, but Windsor, you could swap out the syntax for that here. But in order to have the instance provider work, I need to create a new endpoint, a new service behavior. To do that, I've created another class called IoC Service Behavior, where it inherits off of iService Behavior, yet again another extension point within WCF. And there's some pretty straightforward logic here where I'm just basically looping through all the channels and doing some magic here. And you'll notice I'm also calling a instance of my instance provider, which we just looked at, and passing the service type. And there's not a whole lot of other magic going on here, so it's a pretty straightforward class. Now, once I've got my service behavior created in my instance provider, I need to create my host, nothing major here either, and I need to create the factory. My factory is what's actually going to set up my bindings. So earlier we took a look at how I use my global ASAX to initialize structure map. Now we're going to use our service factory, which again, another extension point within WCF, to do that for us. So all this code is provided. It's not a lot of code, and you can actually get most of this as is, exactly as is, off of Jimmy's website, and I will include it in the episode. And we're going to include that into our application. Now, if I bring up my WCF test client and I provide the service, we should be able to add this just fine. Interesting. I get an error. Failed to add service. Service metadata cannot be accessed. Interesting. I get a really funky exception here. I know what it is. The problem is we've set up our new service so that it requires dependencies from the inside, but we haven't done it from the outside at the .svc level. So let's go ahead and kill this. Let's do a view markup of our service. The last thing we need to do here is add one line of code. So let's go ahead and break this down so we can see a little bit better. I need to add this line here, factory. I need to specify my service host factory within my WCF service. Now if I F5 this all over again, I should be good to go, and I should have my dependencies injected for me. So I didn't get any exceptions this time, which is good. Let's go ahead and invoke that again. And voila, this time WCF created my service via my own custom factory, injected an instance of my specification into it with all the right specifications provided afterwards. It allows me to run, and it happened to return false, but hey, that's not really the point of the demo. So we now can allow our IoC containers to hook into WCF so that we can now just automatically create our services, have all the dependencies and all their dependencies injected all the way down the tree, and we are good to go, and I no longer have to sprinkle object factory throughout my code base. I can use good practices in terms of separation concerns and dependency inversion, and we're good to go. So to recap real quick, what do you need to do to implement this? Well, first you need to take the 4 files that I'm going to provide as part of this episode that will set up our hooks into WCF. I need to go into the WCF service and add in this factory right here. And after that, it's just business as usual. Create your classes, injecting your dependencies through constructor or even setter injection if you want to, and rock and roll. So I hope you learned something, and until next time.